So you're walking down the street somewhere in Ontario or anywhere in Canada, and a police officer stops you and starts asking questions. So in that situation, you say to them, "Officer, what's your badge number? What's your name?" Are they required to give it upon being asked? That's the question we're going to answer today. It's a very important question, and the answer may surprise you because a lot of people don't know the answer to this question, obviously. So, do police in Canada have to provide their name and badge number if you ask them? So we're going to give you some examples. So the general rule in Ontario and throughout Canada, there's a regulation, for example, in Ontario that specifically states, for example, if a plainclothes police officer stops you, let's say they stop your vehicle, you can ask them for their badge number and their name, and they are required to give it to it within a reasonable time as long as it doesn't compromise officer safety. So that's an accountability thing, isn't it? So you're entitled to do that. Depending on the situation, you may or may not want to do that, and we're going to give some real life examples. So yes, with exceptions, they're required to give you their name, their badge number, and the name of their police service. So let's take some scenarios and talk about a few exceptions here, okay? So take the typical speeding, situation where you're speeding and they stop and maybe the incident gets a little tense in your mind. And are you allowed to ask them for their that? For sure. And they're required to provide it as long as it doesn't compromise officer safety. For example, if you're threatening them in the moment, they're not going to give you their name and badge number, but they're going to, do that eventually back at the police station. So it really depends on the situation. So I wouldn't necessarily advise starting off a conversation with a police officer on that if the interaction with them is going well, why bother? Like you're talking about a speeding ticket, etc. But in certain situations for accountability, depending on your judgment, but don't escalate it, just calmly ask it, and they will typically, and they're required to provide it in a typical scenario. So what are the exceptions? Well, I talked about officer safety. So an obvious one, if there's an undercover operation, a lot of people think, oh, if someone's undercover, say they're infiltrated the Hells Angels or a bike gang, are you a cop? They don't have to say that. They obviously don't have to give their badge number. I gave the other scenario where you stop, a police officer stops you on the road and it's getting very tense and physical. And for example, let's say a person's threatened the police. Well, they're not going to give you a name and badge number in that moment, but they eventually will, probably after they arrest you. So every situation is different. Now, we have a situation in Ontario where sometimes the police will stop people in the streets, and this was a carding scenario which was going on in Toronto a lot. There's rules for that now, that the police have to tell you that you're not required to answer their questions. They have to give you their name and badge number and police service, and they have to give you a receipt with that on. So you should ask them, am I being detained? Am I free to go? And they'll typically say yes. They're trying to trick you, but you don't have to answer their questions unless they put you under detention. Let's say they have suspicion of a crime. Well, they're going to detain you and give you your rights to counsel. So it's very important for accountability for this in the province. A lot of people don't understand this. I would recommend that in any scenario, whether you're being placed under arrest or speeding ticket or a traffic stop, you don't necessarily need to ask these things unless it becomes tense, for example, and remain calm. You can ask them. They'll get the message then at that point that you're looking for accountability. Maybe it'll assist in diffusing the situation if you're able to use the right words. But the problem is a lot of citizens will get really uppity and they start demanding these things at first instance on a traffic stop. Why would you do that? Why would you want to escalate a situation with officers being very polite, nice to you? Maybe they won't write a ticket. Maybe when they stop you in the street, if you're polite to them, say, no, I really don't want to answer your questions. You can just walk away rather than getting confrontational. So these regulations, they apply throughout Canada, and you are entitled. And I would ask you to exercise your good common sense, though. If it's not a situation that escalated, why do you need to know that? If you are in an escalated situation, you can calmly ask it. Hopefully it assists in diffusing it. What happens if they don't give it to you? For example, they refuse. Maybe some officer's not going to follow the law. Well, you could note their cruiser license plate in your mind. You could note the name of their police service, the time of the stop, and get as many details as in your mind. You could file a complaint later in that situation if you wanted to. So every situation is different. You may not need to ask that question unless you absolutely think you need to. For example, if I was stopped in a speeding situation and it was a very polite interaction, I would never want to escalate. That's just my view, but everyone's different. A lot of people like standing on their rights, and we'll leave that up to you. So that's the video for today. The takeaway here is that yes, in Ontario, with some exceptions, the police are required to give you their name, their badge number, and the name of the police service when you ask them when you're being detained or stopped in the traffic or placed under arrest. And it's it's an accountability situation. Well, there you have it. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. Thank you for watching our video. We are absolutely committed to bringing you the best possible criminal and DUI educational videos. If you found this video helpful, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you've been charged with a criminal offense in Ontario and require our services, please click on the link in the description below.